Welcome to today's class. Today I'm happy to be talking about mystery, a very important and very relevant subject. As I've said many times, this class is a critical thinking class about the inner life. So as we're doing critical thinking, we're walking around trying to feel up this elephant as much as possible from as many different angles as possible and collect our observations, bring them back together, and kind of analyze it and see what we can deduce about what's happened and what we might induce about what will happen. That's critical thinking. But in the yin-yang of life, there's critical thinking, and then there's mystery. There's trying to understand the world, and then there's just appreciating the fact that there's certain things that we will never understand. This was a very important thing for Mary. She really reveled in the power of mystery. And a good place to start today's class is with this quote from Mary. When we as human beings encounter something that is deeply mysterious, we shy away from it. We try to explain it by ordinary terms, which is, of course, a total failure. In our present time, people think if we can't explain something, it's because we can't yet explain it, but we will eventually be able to. Science is based on one of the great faiths in the present time, that something can be profitably examined from the point of view of knowledge, and that we will clear up mystery. We think of mystery as something that will be solved, if not next week, then next year or another 10 years, but eventually we'll understand it. The more you look at our existence, we are forever surrounded by endless and unanswerable mysteries. None of the important things in life, love, creativity, the future, can be explained at all. Mystery is just an essential part of life. It's a source of richness, enjoyment, and wonder, and it makes life constantly turn up surprising things for all of us. So I thought today we would have a mystery appreciation day where we just take a step back and just try to be comfortable with the things that we don't know and that we'll never know and see where that takes us. Now here's a great drawing that our reader Isabel did. I love this thing. It's the body of all possible knowledge. And you'll see she's got a magnifying glass symbolizing critical thinking, of course, and she's looking at this small sliver, and that's the things you realize you know. Then there's a bigger sliver, which is things that you realize that you don't know. And then the big piece is things that you don't realize that you don't know. So, for instance, I know I'm in California right now. I know my name starts with the letter A. I know that besides my head, I'm a pretty hairy dude. I know all those things for sure. Then there's things that I know that I don't know. I know that I don't know astrophysics. I don't know Mandarin. I don't know who built the pyramids. I know that I don't know it. Then, and I think maybe aliens built the pyramids, but then there's the things that I don't know, which is the vast majority of almost everything that we just don't even have a clue that we don't have a clue. So imagine a 3-year-old and astrophysics. A 3-year-old doesn't understand astrophysics. A 3-year-old doesn't even know that there's such a thing as astrophysics to understand. And that's how we are with almost everything in our world and the universe. And by the way, religion and science, as different as they are, they both try to do the same thing. They both try to explain the mysterious and the unknown. And they completely disagree with each other most of the time, but they both have that same goal. So what exactly is mystery? The definition is very easy to understand: something that is difficult or impossible to understand or explain. And for those rare times that I don't have any balloons on me to distract me from life, I like to contemplate my personal top 3 unknowable mysteries of the known universe. Starting off with number 3. The sun is just one of 200 billion stars in our galaxy, and there are over 2 trillion galaxies. Think about that. 200 billion, not planets, stars in just our galaxy, and there's over 2 trillion galaxies. That's literally mind-boggling, literally. Number 2. We all start off as a single sperm and egg, and within approximately 9 months, we grow in size and complexity by a factor of trillions and trillions. All right? We all start off as an egg and a sperm, and then all of a sudden, 9 months later, which isn't very long, there's a spinal cord, a brain, a nervous system, eyeballs, a soul, a conscience, imagination. In 9 months from something, a sperm and an egg that we can't even see with our own eyes? 9 months. And number 1, as we live this life, it is unknown when we may die, where our soul or personality go after, or if there's even a unified thing to go anywhere. We literally have no idea what happens when we die. Except for the fact that we know that everyone and everything is going to die. But there's nobody who's come back and has told us in a way that everyone believes. This is not possible. So let's say that science and religion decide to team up and solve all the mysteries in life, right? They solve all the scientific mysteries and all the philosophical mysteries, which obviously is impossible, but let's just pretend they did that. We still have the mystery of tomorrow. There's no one who's going to be able to predict what tomorrow is going to bring, let alone 2 years from now or 20 years from now. And speaking of tomorrow, a great way of conceptualizing mystery is through luck. And I really love Mary's painting of Fortuna. I love that Fortuna is in the middle with the Wheel of Fortune behind her and people falling off or rising up on the Wheel of Fortune, and she's got the dice in her hand and she's looking off to the side because you can't make eye contact with her. And then on the panel next to her, she used the William Blake quote, "Some were born to sweet delight and some were born to endless night." And that's a way of saying that no matter how much free will or critical thinking we have or develop in life, we're still subject to good luck, bad luck, being in the right place at the right time, the wrong place at the wrong time. Doesn't matter who you are. If you're a prince or if you're a homeless person, we all are affected by luck, which is something we do not control. In fact, none of the things that we really think are most important in life, love, joy, creativity, courage, none of those can really ever be explained, let alone controlled. So to balance out our anxiety about the unknowable mysteries of life, hopefully we can remember the positive side of this cosmic equation, that mystery is a source of richness and enjoyment and wonder, and it makes life constantly turn up surprising things for all of us. So imagine reading a mystery novel where you already know the end. Why would you read it? Imagine watching a basketball game where you already know the score. Well, it's less exciting than watching it live when you don't know what's going to happen. And one more point on this, all the great intelligence in life, whether it's scientists or artists, are in absolute agreement about one thing. The more we know, the more we understand that life is an absolute mystery. In fact, Albert Einstein said the most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of true art and true science. And the French writer Anais Nin wrote, "The possession of knowledge does not kill the sense of wonder and mystery. There is always more mystery." So, today we are having Mystery Appreciation Day. And in particular, we are going to look at desire, inspiration, and intuition. These are three things that affect all our lives, and we don't control any of them, but they affect us greatly. And then we will jump into the assignment. Okay, let's begin with desire. Desire is something I became really fascinated with one night in particular. I remember this very clearly. My band Unpoppable played. Really good show, and I was driving home afterwards, and I kept hearing bass lines in my head, just more and more bass lines, and I was like, it was driving me crazy. I was like, you know what, I just played for an hour and a half. I had plenty of bass lines there. Why am I still hearing more and more bass lines? And so I just turned on the radio to distract myself, give myself a little break. And there was a news story about Michael Jackson molesting children. And when I got home, I parked and I sat there in my car and I realized I have a desire for bass lines. I don't know where this desire came from. It just appeared. I have eargasms. Like when I hear great bass lines, I start convulsing. I have a desire to make those bass lines. It just appeared. Michael Jackson has a desire for prepubescent boys. Where did that desire come from? And I really realized that we don't control our desires. They control us. We have a chance of somewhat controlling them, but really, we don't invent them, we discover them. So I realized, okay, there's something really profound with this experience of desire, so I began to investigate it. And many other people have also been fascinated by desire. And desire, like habit that we discussed last week, is a double-edged sword. The Bhagavad Gita, a Indian mystical book from 200 BC, said desires are the constant enemy of the wise. And then in 1937, this man, Napoleon Hill, wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich, where he interviewed Andrew Carnegie and Rockefeller and all the most successful, the Elon Musks of his era, and tried to understand what made them successful. And what he figured out was they all had desire. They all had a desire to build something and be successful. And he says desire is the starting point of all achievement. Not a hope, not a wish, but a keen, pulsating desire which transcends everything. And by the way, this book has sold something like 15 million copies. So our goal in investigating desire today, together, is to understand how and why desires arise, how they affect our lives, and what can we do to master them. And when I say understand, we can't understand it. We can just kind of observe it and appreciate it. And to prove that it's very difficult and basically impossible to understand and define desire, I read a scientific journal that analyzed desire, and here was their definition of desire. You ready for this? Correlative dispositional states of a potentially irrational agent. Okay, if we really spent time, we could figure out what that really means, but we know that it doesn't mean anything because it doesn't really tell you what desire is, because desire is felt in the heart and not in the brain. So it's kind of like defining laughing. Sure, you can have a definition for laughing, but you don't really understand what laughing is because you have to feel laughing. A better answer for what is desire comes to us from the branch of knowledge called philosophy. And they say desires are the eternal search of humans to enjoy their true nature, i.e. consciousness, knowledge, and pleasure. So certainly we're getting a little bit closer with that definition. And the truth is, we are awash in desire literally every waking moment of our life. So we are so consumed by desire that we actually become oblivious to its presence in us, which is a paradox. But if you think about it, you become aware how remarkable it is that desires seem to have a life of their own. They just pop into your head seemingly out of nowhere, and you don't choose them, you don't control them often, and mostly they control you. One of the great quotes that I read about desire was from philosopher Shane Mulhall. He said, "Desires enter the house of man as a guest, soon becomes the host, and soon after becomes the master of the house." And like values, there are so many desires to have. You can desire power, you can desire having love in your life, you can desire adventure, you can desire tranquility. There's no end to the things that we can desire. There are, however, three distinct elements to desire that we can be cognizant of, pay attention to, and get a sense of how powerful this desire is in our life. One is intensity, two is persistence, and three is resistance to change. So intensity is, you can say, the volume. How loud is this desire in your head that you can't really even concentrate on anything else because it's so overwhelming? Two is persistence. How often does it show up? Is it something that happens, occasionally, or is it something that is a major component of your day-to-day life? And three, resistance to change. Once you decide, okay, I don't want to have this desire, how possible or how easy it is for you to get a grip on it. And then there's Mary's painting of self-discipline, which we discussed last week in the habit class, where Mary says there's no such thing as self-discipline, there's only desire. And if you desire something enough, it will create the discipline in your life, because you will do whatever it takes to make that desire come true. Now, that's a more life-affirming take on desire, or at least the productive part of desire. The religion and philosophy of Buddhism, you can literally say, begins and ends with desire and suffering. In Buddhism, there's the Four Noble Truths. One, human life is full of suffering and sorrow. Nobody escapes suffering and sorrow on this planet. Two, suffering and sorrow are caused by people's greedy desire for power, pleasure, and possessions. So the idea is our desire for certain experiences are based on a false belief that these desired experiences will actually save us from suffering. And often they actually lead us to suffering, which is a paradox again. And number three, suffering and sorrow will end when people overcome their greed. So instead of changing the outside reality, you're changing your own desire and attitude and way of interacting with the world. And number four, people can overcome their greed and uncontrolled desires by adopting the middle way, or the eightfold path. So what is the middle way and the eightfold path? Well, the middle way, as we've already discussed, is the yin-yang, and finding that balance between opposite extremes, right? So when you take a shower, there's only hot water, there's only cold water. But the goal is to find that right balance between the two extremes, because on their own they both suck individually, but together you find that sweet spot, stay in the shower all morning. And the eightfold path is basically the Buddhist version of the Ten Commandments. It's 8 ways to live that will allow you to get a grip on your desires not ruining your life. And those are right view, right intentions, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, and right mindfulness. And now here's the paradox of the Buddhist perspective on desire. The desire to get rid of desire is a desire in and of itself. Another paradox. And finally, I want to discuss this really fascinating idea of the dynamic between desire and duty, because they really are kind of like hot and cold water. They are opposite ends of the spectrum as far as how we interact with people. Desire is what you want. Duty is what you ought to do, right? I want say, I don't know, let's just say my mom is sick. I want to go to Coachella and take ecstasy with all my friends for 2 weeks. That's my desire. But my mom is at home sick. I have a duty to my mom because she took care of me when I was sick. So while my desire says split, my duty says stay. So it's the difference between what you want and what you ought to do. And it's also seen in the context of individual liberty and responsibility. This is Viktor Frankl. He was a psychologist born in Austria. He died in 1997, and he was a survivor of the Nazi concentration camps, Auschwitz in particular. When he got out, he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about how do you find meaning when you've just experienced the most horrifying thing possible. And he's famous for saying, those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. So when Viktor Frankl left Europe, came to the United States, he saw the Statue of Liberty, and he was very moved by it. But then he said something really fascinating. He said, freedom is in danger of degenerating into mere arbitrariness unless it's lived in terms of responsibleness. That is why I recommend that the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast be supplemented by a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. And here is an artist's rendition of what the Statue of Responsibility could look like. I think it's a really beautiful idea and really important because we do have to balance out our desires with our duties and really find the balance between what we want to do and what we ought to do. So that's a little bit of an overview about desire. Now we're going to get into intuition. To have a better understanding of what intuition is and the role it plays in our life, it's good to take a step back and get a wide-angle perspective. So here are the 4 branches of philosophy. There's epistemology, which is the study of the nature of knowledge. That is, how do we know what we know? There's ethics, which is concerned with issues of right and wrong, like we discussed in the moral relativism class. Then there's logic, which examines ideas in an orderly and systematic way. What are the principles of correct reasoning? That's what logic asks. And then there's metaphysics, which addresses the ultimate nature of reality. Does the universe have a design or a purpose? So honestly, out of these 4, logic and metaphysics don't really interest me so much. Logic is super important on the most foundational level, but getting too much in the weeds is not productive, I don't think. And metaphysics, I don't like speculating about, what's going to happen when we die because, what's the point? You're just going to find out eventually. But epistemology and ethics, those are fascinating. Ethics, we got to have a grip on if we want to live an ethical life. But epistemology in particular is really fascinating, and that's what we're going to look into right now. How do we know what we know? So, first of all, there's many different types of intelligence, and we all know this to be true, right? There's people who are musical geniuses. There's people who are able to learn languages really quickly. There's people who are great athletes, and they have like this body awareness. There's people with interpersonal intelligence where they just have a knack for rapport and talking to people and understanding group dynamics. That's the type of intelligence. So we're all born and are capable of thinking in the way of all this different types of intelligence, but most of us have a propensity or a strength in one of these in particular. So for instance, you could be a 300-pound Jabba the Hutt, but a mathematical genius, or you could have 0% body fat but not even know what 5 times 6 is. So our brains are all wired differently, and we understand the world through the type of intelligence that we have. And then, more epistemology, on top of that, there's different ways of knowing. That is, every person has different ways of observing and collecting information. So for instance, there's sense perception, right? You just observing things and through your senses and making sense of it that way, like the elephant. There's custom and tradition. As you remember, Becca, our Amish friend from the values class, she asked her mom, why do we do this? And she said, this is what I learned, this is a tradition, this is our custom. So that is an answer that's perfectly suitable for a lot of people. Also authority. You'll read in for the final book in this class, Hitler, Stalin, and I. She talks about how groupthink happens under a communist regime, and it's all about the authority, and no one can question the authority. Then there's faith, right? A lot of people just believe. They don't need proof. I believe Jesus died for our sins. That's all I need to know. Everything else is, the devil talking. Then there's imagination. If you're an inventor, you're in your imagination all the time thinking about what can possibly be. Critical thinking, as we've discussed, and a really important way of knowing what is real in this world is through intuition. So what is intuition? Intuition is a sudden flash of understanding that you have that's not based on facts or observation, and it comes from some sort of unknown source. But it's what we call our gut feel. And a lot of times, I'm in the TV business, we sit there and we're constantly solving problems, right? The TV business is all about solving problems. And oftentimes you have to use your critical thinking to solve a problem, look at it from all the different angles. But then you're like, you know what? My gut tells me we should do this. That's what intuition is, that gut feeling where it's like, I know it's not based on the facts, but in my bones, I feel we need to do this. How do I know? I just feel it in my bones, and I trust my intuition. So the word intuition comes from Latin, in, meaning at or on, and turi, meaning look at or watch over. So it's really interesting to think about the word intuition because it's the same word as paying your tuition or having a tutor. Intuition is your internal tutor. And intuition is a completely different phenomena than reason or critical thinking, right? Critical thinking is we're observing all these things, putting the pieces together, then you take a step back and question, does that make sense? And you make improvements. Intuition is it's like a quantum leap. It's just this idea just appears out of nowhere. Somebody who was really into intuition was Steve Jobs, the guy who started Apple Computers. That top left picture is him and Steve Wozniak. Those are the two guys who built it in the garage. By the way, that first Apple computer that they built out of wood that you see in the top right corner, they built that in their garage in Cupertino, just 30 miles from our UC Santa Cruz campus. Then in the bottom left, there he is with the first Macintosh computer, which is the first computer that actually had a visual interface where you can have a mouse and folders and drag things around. And then, of course, they came out with the iPod. So let's just take a quick look at some of these amazing things that Steve Jobs invented in 30-year span. He created the Apple II, which is the first PC that was not for hobbyists, right? So it was the first computer for normal people. And then the Macintosh a few years later, which, as I said, was the first that had that visual interface and changed all computers forever. Then he got kicked out of Apple and started Pixar and basically reinvented the animation industry. He started all the Apple stores, which was connecting a manufacturer with retail, which is very hard to do. Very few companies can actually do that. Created the iPod, which changed how the entire world consumed music. Started the iTunes Store, which completely changed and actually saved the music industry. Created the iPhone, which obviously turned the whole world into a bunch of zombies. The App Store, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The iPad, the iCloud, which syncs up all your devices. And then Apple is just the richest company in the world. So why do I tell you all this? Because according to Steve Jobs, all these successes are based on intuition. So this is from the biography about Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, which I read this summer, and I totally recommend. I got the audiobook, but it's totally worth it. And basically, went to college, dropped out, took a bunch of acid, worked on an apple farm, started meditating, decided to go to India when he was like 22 and study meditation there. And so here is a passage from the book where he talks about that experience. People in the Indian countryside don't use their intellect like we do. They use their intuition instead. And their intuition is far more developed than in the rest of the world. Intuition is a very powerful thing, more powerful than intellect in my opinion. That has had a big impact on my work. I began to realize that intuitive understanding and consciousness was more significant than abstract thinking and intellectual logical analysis. Western rational thought is not an innate human characteristic. It's learned, and it's a great achievement of Western civilization. In the villages of India, they never learned it. They learned something else, the power of intuition. And if you just sit and observe, you'll see how restless your mind is. If you try to calm it, it only makes it worse. But over time, it does calm. And when it does, there's room to hear more subtle things. That's when your intuition starts to blossom and you start to see things more clearly and be in the present more. You see so much more than you could see before. It's a discipline and you have to practice it. What he's talking about is one of the fundamental ideas of all the Eastern religions. Whereas in the Western religions like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, those are all based on revelation from a supernatural, superpower, hero, best friend, God type of person, right? Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, they're all prophets and messengers who are delivering the message from this God. Buddhism, Taoism, I think to a certain extent Hinduism too, though don't quote me on that. It's a different way of interacting with the world where it's not about revelation, it's more about intuition. And you get to intuition through meditation by calming the mind. So if you can make your mind as still as water, where you can see your reflection, right? Because if the water is, got ripples and all that, you can't actually see your reflection. So if your mind has ripples and movement in it, you can't actually see what's really happening. So if you can still your mind like still water so you can see your reflection, then all of a sudden the answer will become apparent to you. It just appears. So for instance, nobody tells a parent you should love your child. You just know it instantly. You have this little creature and you love it. You don't need revelation from above to tell you something like that. It's just something that's instinctive and intuitive in you. So that's what intuition is calming the mind so you could really listen and hear. And Osho, the crazy but really brilliant Indian philosopher, said, only in emptiness do you become pregnant with truth. That's really beautiful. Only in emptiness do you become pregnant with truth. Now, it's important to say the dark side or the bad side about intuition. First of all, intuition is not infallible, right? It only seems to be true, but it could be wrong. For instance, Steve Jobs got diagnosed with cancer. The doctor said to him, we can operate and there's a very high success rate and you'll be okay. He did not want to have an operation. His intuition apparently told him that he could go the more holistic route and do things through a vegan diet and whatever other procedures or modalities. And you know what happened? The cancer spread all over his body and he died. So his intuition on that level was very wrong. So problems with intuition is that it's not available when you need it all the time. Like sometimes you need it and you don't control it, it just doesn't appear. Only you can experience it, right? So if you have intuition, you can't expect somebody else to have that same level of enthusiasm about it as you do. And as I said, it's a potential source of truth, not a test of truth. So to finish up this section about intuition and the gut feel, I thought it'd be good to get a quick tour of the latest in cognitive science and what they've observed just in the last few years about how there's actually a second brain in our gut. Here's this video, it's about 2 minutes.
Where we sit right now in history is right at the cusp of a complete paradigm shift in how we think about mental wellness. If we had a problem that we perceived here, it seemed like it made sense that it was in the brain and we should target the brain. And that's what we've been doing for the last 100, 200 years. What we're realizing now is that maybe that isn't our primary target. And what we're seeing here in the brain is a secondary effect of something else that's happening in the body. And what we've just learned in the last 5 to 10 years is that yes, that is a secondary effect. The primary effect, and therefore the primary target, is in the gut. That's the second brain. That's where we have 100 trillion bacteria in our intestines. That number is more than there are stars in the galaxy, in the Milky Way. So the gut microbiome makes more serotonin than the brain does. That's the feel-good neurotransmitter. It makes more dopamine than the brain. In order for these neurotransmitters in the gut to have their effect in the brain, they have to be able to communicate with each other. And they do that through chemicals that the gut makes, chemicals that the bacteria make, that travel throughout the body, that signal through the nervous system, that signal through the immune system. This idea of the gut-brain axis, targeting the brain, but targeting the second brain in the gut, and then targeting the communication network between them, that axis, that's really the forefront of medicine these days, and the forefront of science, and the forefront of how we're going to actually get ahead of all of these mental wellness issues and have a benefit in people's lives.
So I hope that this little introduction to intuition allows you to be more comfortable with your gut feel and listen to it. And now let's check out inspiration. Before we continue though, let me just admit that I had to do a wardrobe change because I tried dressing fancy like a real professor today and I bungled it. So I looked in the mirror and I looked like a Jewish cholo. So I just said, you know what, let me just put on my regular clothes. So anyway, here we are, inspiration. The word inspiration means to blow into, to breathe, to infuse, as in something coming in, as opposed to the opposite, expire, which means to breathe out or run out. So the actual root of the word inspiration, spire, means literally spirit. So it's a spirit coming inside of you. And inspiration is one of the most profound feelings any person could ever experience. Anybody who's ever felt it knows that it's not really of their own doing and that it's something from the outside coming into them or through them. We get inspiration from 4 main sources: art and culture, nature, people, and the mystical state, which is the most rare and elusive and potentially powerful form of inspiration. So let's start off with art and culture. So when I was 8 years old, I really loved football. And in particular, my favorite player was this guy, Earl Campbell, number 34 from the Houston Oilers. He had the most amazing style. He was so big. And instead of running around defenders, he would just run right through them and just lift them up and take them on a ride. And I remember as an 8-year-old watching him thinking, oh, that's how you do it. If someone's trying to stop you, you don't go around them, you just go through them. And Earl Campbell never called me and said, kid, if someone tries to stop you, just go right through them. It's just something as an 8-year-old that I picked up from him and was definitely inspired by. Another way people get inspired is through nature. I took a walk in the woods and came out taller than the trees. Henry David Thoreau said that. So nature definitely has the ability to hit the reset button for your stress and uplift you. Birds have always had the ability to bring me out of a dark space and provide relief in bad times. Here's an example of experiencing inspiration through another person. Remember I told you last week in the habit class that I stopped drinking 2 years ago? Well, what happened was I started dating this woman, and she's like a super athlete. She was so healthy. And I was drinking, a lot all my life. And we were out to dinner once and spicy Thai food, and we're, eating all the chilies. And I just threw back 3 Singhas, Thai beer. This is like my favorite. Those Thai beers with the chilies, oh my God. I drank these 3 beers, and I just looked at her and I saw she was so healthy. And I've been putting these poisons in my body for so long that if I wanted to kind of vibrate on her level, I needed to get my shit together and be cleaner so I could really enjoy our time together. So she never said to me, drinking's bad for you, why are you drinking so much? She was just being herself, and she inspired me to do something which I never thought was possible, which was stop drinking. And then we split up, and I still stopped drinking because it's just so much better. Life without alcohol is so much better. And then the other form of inspiration I was telling you about that can come from a mystical experience. This is a fascinating story. This is a man named Bill W. And Bill W. started Alcoholics Anonymous. He was a soldier in World War I, came back, became a brutal alcoholic, was drinking 2 quarts of whiskey a day. 2 quarts, 2 bottles of whiskey a day. And he went to law school, but he didn't even graduate because he was too drunk to go, to finish up after all the time there. And his life was in a spiral. The 4th time he went to the hospital for alcohol poisoning, and he just seemed like a hopeless degenerate, he had a spiritual experience in the hospital. And he said, and this is from the Wikipedia article about him, he said, "I'll do anything at all. If there be a God, let him show himself." He then had the sensation of a bright light, a feeling of ecstasy and new serenity. He never drank again for the remainder of his life. Wilson described this experience to Dr. Silkworth, who told him, "Something has happened to you I don't understand, but you better hang on to it." So from the depths of his despair, he had a moment of inspiration from who knows where, and he created Alcoholics Anonymous, which is one of the most healing and beneficial cultural institutions of all time. Because alcohol has wreaked havoc in so many people's life, and he helped come up with a system to help people. So this is a great example of what Mary said in the chapter about inspiration that you read. She said, inspiration is a kind of spiritual energy by which somebody's will is awakened or reinforced. So inspiration cannot be controlled, right? It comes from the outside. You can't just say, I'm going to be inspired right now. It's kind of like flying a kite. You have to walk up the hill with the kite, but unless there's wind, there's no kite flying, right? You might be ready, you might have the most expensive, most beautiful kite in the world, but if there's no wind, you can't do anything, and guess what? You don't control the wind. None of us do. This is Bob Dylan, one of the greatest songwriters of the 20th century, and he said about his early songs, those early songs just came through me. It wasn't like I had to compose them. That doesn't happen anymore. I just can't write them that way anymore, but I can still sing them. So in the context of this type of inspiration, Mary says, inspiration can be summoned, but it cannot be commanded or controlled. It can't be arranged for. It's not anything you can work up to or deserve. It's a pure gift. And if the muses don't come, there is nothing you can do. And for many people, that's a great anguish, especially writers. Another great example of inspiration that Mary mentioned in the interview with her is Simon Rodia, who was an Italian immigrant to the U.S., lived in Watts, and built the Watts Towers. In his house, he was inspired to build these crazy columns, spires, and he did it all by himself. And they're still there today. If you go to Watts, you can go to the Watts Towers. And Mary says there are people who have the passion to make something extraordinary, but they don't think, and quite rightly so, that anybody's going to support them in this. They can't even get a grant because what they want to do is so eccentric. It's just beyond the realm of what can be understood or accepted. Yet they feel the inspiration and are determined to follow it. Think about it. He built these crazy spires by himself. He had to climb up and down these spires every day to build it. Check out what he had to say about his building of the Watts Towers. I have nobody to help me out. I was a poor man, had to do a little at a time. Nobody helped me. I think if I hire a man, he don't know what to do. 1,000,000 times I don't know what to do myself. I never had a single helper. Some of the people say, what was he doing? Some of the people think I was crazy, and some people said I was going to do something. I wanted to do something in the United States because I wasn't born here. I wanted to do something for the United States because there are nice people in this country. I had in mind to do something big, and I did. Definitely, if you ever visit LA, check out the Watts Towers. It's so trippy and really beautiful. True inspiration is the greatest reward that life can give you. You feel that you are connected to something which is larger and stronger, and that you have been given something that you need to do. So you may be asking yourself, okay, this inspiration stuff sounds pretty cool. I get that it comes from outside of us, but how do I try to make myself open to it, right? How do you go up to the hill with the kite and hope that the wind comes? Well, Mary had a very interesting insight into this. She said, if people limit themselves to what they love or what they believe to be true, then they will be open to inspiration. Because if you believe it to be both true and important, then it liberates you to speak with clarity because you want people to understand it. You do not want any obscurity. And you become passionate about it. If you speak from that love, you are given the power to speak from love itself. Let's back up and read that again, because that's one of the most important things anyone will ever tell you. If you speak from that love, you are given the power to speak from love itself. So that concludes today's broad introduction to mystery, desire, intuition, and inspiration. And here's the important point out of all of this. It seems like this class is all over the place, and we're talking about this and we're talking about that. And the truth is, all these things put together are all designed to help you figure out a way that life sucks less, right? The yin-yang and balance, habit formation, and self-justification, how we lie to ourselves about ourselves without even realizing it, and mystery. If you are able to not be tormented by mystery, but actually see it as a natural part of the universe and more powerful than us, really, and actually find inspiration or energy through it, then that's a good way of making life suck less, right? It's all about making life suck less. And cozying up with mystery is certainly one of the ways that we can minimize the amount of torment we feel. And finally, I want to close today the way we began, with a quote from Mary. And this is super deep. She said, "We are such extraordinary and inexplicable creatures. We come out of nothingness into the world, and then we disappear into nothingness, leaving no trace of where we've gone. Throughout our short lives, we are always in the middle of mystery of who we are and where we come from. The only thing I know is that we are meant to act, and we are meant to act through love." So I hope you enjoyed our Mystery Appreciation Day. We do have an assignment. Are you ready? Here we go. Here's a quote from the philosopher William James. He wrote this in 1901. And he says, and this is the assignment, this quote right here, okay? Existence then will be a brute fact to which, as a whole, the emotion of ontologic wonder shall rightfully cleave, but remain eternally unsatisfied. Then wonderfulness or mysteriousness will be an essential attribute to the nature of things, and the exhibition and emphasizing of it will continue to be an ingredient in the philosophic industry of the race. When I first read this quote, I was around 24, 25. I had to get a dictionary and sit there with a dictionary and really figure out what he was saying. And when I figured it out, it was a beautiful revelation. It's so insightful. So here's the assignment. I want you to write a minimum of one paragraph, right? There's no maximum. You could write as much as you want, but a minimum of one paragraph answering the following two questions. What is William James saying in this passage? Imagine you need to explain it to a 15-year-old. Figure out the meaning and then explain it as clearly and simply as you can. So this is a little bit like trying to understand a piece of poetry. You'll have to invest some time decoding the passage, but the insight is worth it. One paragraph minimum answering that, explaining what he's saying. 2, what is a mystery that you appreciate or are even inspired by? Could be anything, but at least one paragraph. So that's it. That's all I got for you. I hope that for the rest of the week you will ponder the nature of desire and your own intuition and moments that you've been inspired in life and what inspires you now, and that you just kind of, slow dance with the mystery. Just snuggle up and groove out.